Welcome to From the Think Space from Edupulse. In this new series, we meet the inspiring people driving change in education, shaping ideas, sparking debate, and reimagining what's possible. Well, hello and welcome back. It's 2026. It's the Edupulse podcast. The festive season has happened. It's been and gone. And I became a father, which is absolutely mental, Adam. I don't know how that's happened. Well, I do know how that's happened. That's for another podcast. But it did. It happened right on track as well. 10th of December he was born. And I've been in kind of fatherland ever since. So you've been holding the Edupulse fort for us. So thank you so much. But how was your festive season?
But mine was fine. But you also you're underselling it because you also moved house and completed your first term as a head teacher as well.
That also happened, yeah.
All basically within the same 3-month period. You did your first term as a head teacher, moved house, had a baby. You're a new man. I barely even recognise you.
Who said that? Who was that person sitting there? And if anybody's interested, I did a lovely blog that you can find on our website all about that. Because why not take advantage of such a unique opportunity to talk about that kind of stuff? Adam, it's been wild because this is kind of marks our third year now, kind of doing this. We won an award for the stuff we've been doing. We talk to amazing people. We work with amazing people. And I'm really, really excited to be kicking off 2026 with our next guest, because our next guest is somebody I've kind of admired from afar. I've seen at a couple of conferences and I've been too scared to go over and say hi, because that's just how I'm made up. But would you please do us the honor of introducing our first guest from the Thought Space in 2026?
Yeah, it's been mad. It has been a mad 3 years with all these different guests, and we've had a baby and everything. It's been wild.
Have we?
Yeah. So, 2026 starting as we mean to go on with Alex Fairlamb. How are you doing, Alex?
Woo. Good, thank you. I have not moved house. I have not been a head teacher, and I have not had a baby. So I feel like an underachiever in this group of people right now.
But you've done some pretty amazing stuff so far this academic year, though, haven't you? You've had some changes in role and stuff, haven't you?
Yeah, it's been a time of change. So I've taken a step into educational consultancy, and I've just started a part-time role as a teaching and learning coach in a trust. So it's really exciting. But I still feel a bit subpar compared to Chris. I feel this next half term or term, I'm going to have to ramp it up somehow.
No, I think it's me, Alex. I'm going to have to dial it back and basically do nothing for the next year and be decidedly unremarkable. But let's not downplay your achievements, because as Adam and I are about to step into the world as co-authors of our upcoming book, you did that recently as well. And massive congratulations for The Scaffolding Effect, which you wrote with Rachel Ball. That's been received really, really well, and it's massive, and it's part of the
Inner Drive,
the Inner Drive Teacher CPD Academy is what I was trying to get out, the Inner Drive series. So congratulations on that as well. It's a massive achievement.
Thank you. It was a real pleasure to write it. I mean, writing with Rachel Ball, she's an absolute genius. So it's an absolute godsend to be able to work with someone like her. So we first worked together on What is History Teaching Now a couple of years ago, and that process was really positive. So then when The Scaffolding Effect came along, she very kindly asked me to get on board with the project. And it's just been a real honour to work with her and learn so much from her. And the response that we had to the book has been really amazing. We're over the moon with it. I think we feel really proud that there is a lot of information out there about scaffolding, but I think finding that one-stop shop, a synthesis of it, as you've identified, we are all busy people, and it can be hard, therefore, to access all these different blogs and things like that. So what we wanted to do was really make sure that we put together a text that was digested the research into bite-sized chunks, but it also helped to bridge the knowing doing gap by having really practical strategies which could be implemented. And importantly, we thought it was really vital to have subject specific examples, because what we know about scaffolding is actually scaffolding looks different in the different disciplines, and also to have age and stage expectations in there. So it was really fantastic to have a range of primary colleagues and Key Stage 5 experts who came along to provide us with case studies. So I'm sure Elliot Morgan will all know, he very kindly provided a case study,
Hmm.
as did Kieran and also Ben as well. So very lucky to have such talented people contributing all of their wisdom.
Yeah, it's so it's I've got a copy, and I can absolutely attest to the fact it is so practical, and the way that it does chunk up the research. So you kind of get a little bit of like, this is what the research says, this is what you can do with it. Here's the next bit, and this is what you can do with that. So you're not kind of having to like digest and synthesize and work really hard to synthesize a whole load of stuff for yourself. You guys, as the authors, do that really, really skillfully. So it's yeah, it's a really, really fantastic piece of work, and you guys should be super proud of it. Um,
Thank
what we kind of tend to like to do with these episodes as well is kind of ask our guests to go back to the start a little bit and kind of tell us a little bit and tell the listeners a little bit about your story. What have you done? Where have you been? How'd you get to where you are?
Well, I was born on the 8th of December, 19. No, I'm not going to go that far back.
History teacher coming out of you there.
So effectively, I was pretty much straight into the history classroom. I started off at a school in Sunderland. I then left the classroom for a year to go and work in a living history museum, which was quite interesting. I spent the year dressed as a suffragette, which I think comes as no surprise to anyone. And then I returned to the classroom. And within that, I then became a lead practitioner and then an assistant head of teaching and learning. I then at that point decided to move school to embark on a new challenge. So I joined an all through school, which was really great because then that helped me to build my primary expertise and knowledge. And wow, oh my days. Like, I think everyone should spend time in the primary classrooms because it's phenomenal what happens there. And I
Yeah.
think it would just really help to elevate all of the expectations that we have of children from year 7 upwards. And also for us to kind of bow down and pay a bit of homage to to you guys, because I just don't know how you do it in day out. It is exhausting. So it was really great for me to lead teaching and learning professional development across all the phases, and to look at curriculum continuity within history as well, which is an area that I've then gone on to kind of specialise in there as well, because we know that that contributes to the transition gap. I also then became a trust
Mm.
teaching and learning network lead as well, which was brilliant, working with lots of different schools to build a professional network and get some really great speakers in, and to build collegiality and collaboration across the trust. But most recently, as I talked about earlier on, it is that I have decided to take a step into the world of consultancy. But I'm also part-time a teaching and learning coach across a trust, and using responsive coaching and Step Lab as well. Because I never like to sleep, I have also just in September submitted my PhD. So I've got my Viva, which is due to take place in January. So hopefully by the time this podcast goes out, I'm a doctor. If not, cut this bit out. Um, and my thesis is focusing on is focusing on equity and equality in education, and that draws upon the different strands that I've specialised in across my career. So things like curriculum continuity, diverse curricula, scaffolding, inclusive teaching and learning. As well as that, I've managed to add a couple of letters to the end of my name, which is ELE, SLE, Fellow of the Chartered College, and I'm very proud to be an honorary fellow of the Historical Association as well, which basically means maximum history geek points.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's awesome, and like so much of that, interestingly as well, because I always when our guests talk about where they've been, I always kind of try to piece together how everything is kind of culminated in like their sort of most seminal piece of work. So if you think about like everything you've done around scaffolding recently, everything else you've talked about there, a lot of it has been about trying to break things down for other people into really manageable chunks that make all of that stuff more digestible. So if you think about your curriculum continuity work, and now as in your role as a teaching and learning coach, it's all about kind of scaffolding other people's understanding so that they can be empowered to do even more great work in their schools. But I guess when people hear the word scaffolding, they often think that it just means breaking things down into smaller steps, right? But it's
Mhm.
more than that. So how would you define it, and how do you define it?
I think it's always worth going back to the original kind of broad definition of scaffolding, which comes from Brunner around about 1976. And basically, he boils it down to that it's when you basically either can do something unassisted or you can't. You're a novice that in order to be able to do something successfully, you require support and those scaffolds to be able to do it. So, a really kind of brief way of summing that up is he says a process that enables a child or novice to solve a task or achieve a goal that would be beyond his unassisted efforts. Now, if I'm going to put that into layman's talk, which is what we're all here for, is I have joined a fantasy football league. I know nothing about football. My husband is the expert. And so, without his efforts, because I did just think I'm going to join the fantasy football league because I can pick the color of the strips that my team wear. Without his efforts, I am not going to get very far up that league table. So there is the difference between someone who is an expert that doesn't require any verbal nudges, any coaching, any models by showing me the example of his team. I am someone who is a novice that does require that. I think the EEF then helpfully break it down a little bit further, which is where they boil it down to two kind of things. One is that it can be visual, verbal, or written. And I think that's really important because quite often we jump
Mm.
straight to either written, writing frames, keyword banks, or perhaps visual, like a success criteria or a task planner. But it can also be something simple like a nudge. It's as simple as walking over to a child and saying, look, the last time that we did this, how did you approach this? Or why do we always put the brackets here instead of here? And as part of that definition, they also highlight that it's got to be temporary. And that's the gradual release of responsibility. And I think Rachel really nails it with a beautiful quote in our book, which is that actually, if it is that the scaffolds are not going to be removed, if they're just permanently there, then that's not a scaffold, that's your lesson plan. And what we've got to think about is that what we want is, yes, to be able to scaffold students, but the goal is to make them independent and autonomous. And that's the bit that we find that teachers quite often struggle with when to do that gradual release of responsibility. I think Tom Sherrington's got a
Mm.
really good analogy for the temporary aspect of scaffolding when he talks about the idea of a bike with stabilizers and a parent kind of pushing and coaching the child. Over time, those stabilizers do have to come off. That coaching ends, the pushing ends, and that child's got to do it on their own. So I think there's some really great stuff that you can find out, which can probably better define it than my fantasy football league. In fact, if you buy a book for 17.99 called The Scaffolding Effect, it summarizes it far better than I've just done in the past couple of minutes. Available on Amazon and other good websites. But I think a really good place to also go to is the EEF. Because they do really succinctly identify how it fits within different areas such as reading, writing, and also metacognition as well.
That's actually super succinct and quite clear and easy to follow along with. I think there's like two really key takeaways from that I certainly got from that anyway. That I think probably listeners would be well served to kind of really zoom in on. First one being that like it's written, visual, or verbal. And I think so often as teachers, we don't give ourselves any credit for the verbal bit. Like little bits of feedback that we give to students, as you just phrased it, little nudges, reframing of questions, little reminders. We don't give ourselves any credit for those things, but they are so subtly brilliant, and they're subtly brilliant because they're finely tuned to what we know about those students and who might need that at that particular point. And I think sometimes even more skillfully, what I've seen teachers do is go to students and go, I could give you the hint here, but I'm not going to. You know, and it's that moment where it's like previously I've given you the hint on this one before, but I'm not going to give it to you this time. So that student actually knows that they're getting more of that responsibility, and that's that gradual release of autonomy, as you were saying. But they're actually really feeling, oh, this is the moment that it becomes mine, and having that ownership where they can really start to attribute their success or failure and ultimately success to their own efforts that they've done on their own. As you say, that's like the real gold standard of scaffolding. That's what makes it work when you actually remove it. And I think that's probably the second thing I took from what you said there, that the gold standard of scaffolding is what happens when it's gone, not what happens when it's there.
And I think Sherrington's got a really good quote on this where he talks about it's kind of like a snake skin. It gives the illusion of learning like this impermeable skin, and that actually, if it is that the child has been successful with the scaffolds all around them, then it gives that false impression. Whereas actually, when you remove the scaffolds, are they able to do it or not? And I think when children feel that sense of accountability and they can see, it's quite easy with student books to say, look where you were here at this point and look where you are now. You can do this. And I think that's really important. But I think that also leads me to a point which I think is quite important. We do operate in a high accountability sector. In education, there can be a bit of a drive for consistency and compliance, and therefore evidencing of consistency and compliance. And we all lived in the era of the verbal feedback stamp. Please may we never return to that era. And so I think it's really important for those who are observing teachers that we are aware that actually scaffolding, things like verbal nudges, are adaptive and they are responsive. And therefore, if you're going to
Yeah.
pick up books and things like that, you might not necessarily see the adaptations that have taken place. So I think it calls for
Yeah.
a real sense of being sensible. Remember, with Dido, he says that we're looking at, not looking for, and actually just look and having a sensible conversation with teachers about what adaptations they're putting into place. I remember one time I was observing a year 12 chemistry lesson, and I could see some of the adaptations that were taking place live in that moment. But actually, I'm not a year 12 level chemist. And there were a lot of really subtle, beautiful, nuanced nudges that were going on there, which I hadn't realized until I spoke to the children and then I spoke to the staff member. And I think that's just a little bit of a warning bell in terms of how we can make sure that scaffolding doesn't lethally mutate in a drive to demonstrate evidence of compliance.
Yeah, I think that's really important because one of the messages that is so counterintuitive in the work that we do is that success comes before motivation, that whole axiom. Because you have teachers who want to get in the room and go, why aren't they motivated? They love this subject usually. Why aren't they just getting on with it? Why aren't they doing really well? And to be able to be part of the system that gives them the aha moment to whatever scaffolding you've given them, and then the moment where you can proudly step back as a teacher, having taken those stabilizers off and watch them go. You're just like, this is excellent. But to mix metaphors, you've got to then jump back in and swim upstream and catch them before they fall off and whack them back on and say, this is much better if we can. That's great, but now we go. Because I think one thing that I've fallen into as a trap as a teacher is by going, sometimes you go, I just need them to pass. I just need them to pass. I just need them to hit this mark. So I'm going to do all the scaffolding and support I can to get them to this point. Thank goodness, right now I'll focus on the next person. When actually, if it's worked really well, that child will be begging for more. They might not be saying it out loud, but you just know that if you've given that success to them and those aha moments, that actually you could be dealing with a child that has way more grades, and not that it's about grades necessarily, but way more points in their achievement in the future that they can get to, that not even you consider they could do, that they never considered they can do. And that's kind of, for me, what makes your work so important, but what makes our job so such a privilege. And which is why, as a head teacher, in all of the melee and conversations about consultants and teaching and all that kind of stuff, is that sometimes that outside eye, that outside voice, that outside ear can come in and say, yeah, all of this is great, but you do know that child could potentially run. I know they're riding a bike right now, but they could. This is a triathlete, not just a. I'm now mixing metaphors. I'm going with, but do you know what I mean? I think we can.
Yeah.
I could think sometimes we can be guilty of saying we've got a swimmer, and actually they could be a triathlete. And it's important that we get those people to come in and say, have you actually spotted that actually that
Yeah.
they could be better?
Yeah, I think it's that thing, and it comes down to the teacher expectations, really. And again, this is something that we talk about in the book. So we talk about the Bloomer study and the Pygmalion effect, and we talk about um, um, how it is that when it was that students undertook an IQ test, then teachers then taught these students, and they're told that some of them had scored higher on tests. Then when they tested them 8 months later, lo and behold, those children that had been identified as kind of high prior retaining, they scored higher than the other students. Turned out actually, no, they weren't
Yeah.
high prior retaining. But what had changed in that period, the only thing that had changed was the teachers' expectations, because they'd been told that they were high prior retaining. they push them further. And I think that comes down to a lot of unconscious and conscious bias that teachers have within the classroom. I teach history, and it's amazing the amount of people that say, oh, they can't do history, it's too hard for them. They absolutely can do history, and we're not here to create a curriculum of the privileged. Actually, you can study this and you can study that. Instead, it's about how we can really be unapologetically ambitious about what our students can do. And I think a really good phrase that Heidi Hughes used was, it's about scaffolding up, not dumbing down. And what we've got to
Mhm.
consider is that actually, if we keep our expectations high for all students and we scaffold effectively, then they will be able to achieve. Um, it's quite interesting because I've just been reading a book by Benny Cara, which is The Hidden Lives of Learners, with Nuttall's work. And in it, it
Mm.
talks about like ability is not the biggest determiner of actually if a child's going to make progress. It's the amount of encounters that children have, it's the interactions that they have, it's the feedback that they have. And so, what we've got to do is stop relying on kind of data and saying, actually, this is what I'm going to do with this child, and this is what I'm going to, and this is all they'll ever do. They're a grade 4 child, so I need to get them to grade 4. They're a grade 6 child, so I'm going to get them to grade 6. It's actually about thinking about the top of the mountain and trying to push them there. And I think really modeling that to them day in, day out, that you believe in them. And I think that ties a lot back to the work of Mark Roberts and Matt Pinkett, who talk about, this idea of like, how do we solve the problem of underachieving boys? The answer is high expectations and holding them to account with that, but giving them the scaffolds to be successful, feel successful, and therefore be more motivated to learn. And Mark Rowland did a really good piece on that as well, where he says we need to be wary of our unconscious bias and looking for homogenous generic strategies, which Step Lab further develop in their discussion paper on inclusion, where they say sometimes we have this problem of diagnostic overshadowing, where, say, for example, if we find out that a child is dyslexic, we will lower our expectations of that child, that unconscious bias. There's a barrier, drop down that kind of expectation of them. And then we will use generic strategies for, inverted commas, dyslexic child. Whereas actually, what we're doing is we're
Mm.
seeing the label and not the learner, because actually there are lots of other strategies that could support that individual child. And in the paper, it talks about, well, maybe they've got organizational problems. Maybe they've got low working memory. Maybe their attendance is a barrier. And actually, it's the prior knowledge. And so I think what we've got to do is be a lot better at assessing the barriers that individual students face, and also recognizing that we have conscious and unconscious bias when it comes to certain students.
Um, I mean, I was about to ask you another question, but like we can't miss this opportunity to Chris, can you talk a bit about Kamichi, which is, for anybody who doesn't know, is the school that Chris is the head teacher at? Just because when you're talking there about um treating the label rather than the individual, you know, students at Chris's school, a lot of them do come from backgrounds where they've got social, emotional, mental health issues and other SEND challenges. And your staff at your place are absolute experts at seeing the individual. Do you just want to talk around that a little bit?
Yeah, we're very lucky. I always kind of own the privilege. We're a very small independent music specialist school, 60 children, and some children identify themselves as neurospicy. That's the term they like to use, and they kind of, we say the child is autistic, they don't have autism, all that kind of thing. And we have some EHCPs that come in and, oh, this child has some social, emotional, mental health needs, so do social circles with them, do a friendship story, and all of these is, as you're saying, that kind of the dumbing down and then the genericism. Oh, here's the dyslexic child, use his dyslexic approach. And whether it's feedback, whether it's bespoke scaffolding to the child, whether it's the ability to go, I know this kid is absolutely fascinated with fishing, so that's the only way I'm going to get him in the classroom to talk about English or going to do any writing. The What's afforded to us in that privilege is the moment to see that, for some children, sitting in a room with maybe something that works in other settings like TLAC, or sometimes it's just not going to work, and we can't, Edupulse was created to sit outside of this binary of, if you do it like this, you're a demon, if you don't do it like that, you're a demon. There's so many different ways, because there are so many different children, to go completely left of field. I saw Joe Lycett in concert, as it were, and he was talking about LGBT LGBTQ plus, and he went, I don't care for all those letters. He said, I'll have as many letters as there are people, because I just believe that they represent as many different people as possible, and you identify how you identify. That's kind of how I feel about education. There's so many individual children that if we aren't building a curriculum that allows us to take the time to look at the children, so I'm so sorry, I see 300 kids a week, I don't have time to do that. I need to get the content out. They need to listen to me. They need to do call or response. They need to pass their exams. See you later, alligator. On to the next one. I don't believe those teachers who are doing that or supporting that have a disconnect from wanting to have this connection with their children in that way. And I think that what you're talking about is, for me at my school, is fundamental. Some of our children have had, difficulties in larger settings, and some children just want to come to a school that's all about music and we're a bit funky and a bit weird and it's a bit different. But seeing the child and really seeing the child and being able to adapt what you do for everybody. So I say to my teachers, we're teaching to the top through the eyes of send. And that's kind of where we go, because it's the metaphorical tide that raises all ships. And so instead of using a generic dyslexic thing for that one dyslexic child, we might look at teaching spellings across the school using the British Dyslexia Association method, because it's going to raise all ships, and anybody that kind of is showing brilliant spelling or story writing, or they're reading 17 books a day. I always forget who said it. If reading is breathing in, then writing is breathing out. So that's another one of our things that we kind of go, just keep reading, guys. It's, all of that kind of stuff. I think when your priorities, your actions betray your priority, is what I always say. And if you are pausing curriculum delivery to spend time getting to know your children so that it can be delivered in a way that feels individual, you are likely going to be making more gains long term. And speak to those kids in 30 years' time. Who was your favorite teacher? What do you remember? All that kind of stuff, as opposed to these kids who smash out 15 GCSEs and then go, oh, don't ask me what trigonometry is. I've forgotten about that, because they took it, store it, and left. It's a bit controversial, but it's kind of, I don't see at the moment we have an education system that allows both, that allows us to get all of those results and churn through all the topics and things we have to, and speak to the really good work you're talking about. It doesn't exist yet. I believe in a world that it can. We just have to break a few fundamental things first, I think.
Yeah, I really
we've
like
got a long
how.
we've got a long way to go, haven't we?
Yeah, I really liked how in the book that Benny
Yeah, you go,
Cara
Alex.
was writing about, she talked about this idea of each child has their own blueprint, and it's almost like their own fingerprint, and it's about how we create the conditions within which that we are stripping back all the noise that exists within a school and creating the time and capacity. Because you've got a teacher that's on 27 out of 30 hours on a timetable, and they've got duties and all those sorts of things. That's not creating the conditions within which they can really assess the different
No.
barriers, consider the formative assessment, particularly if, we see this in subjects like option subjects in secondary, where, in history, I might only have them for 1 hour a week. And therefore, if I'm a 27 out of 30 hour teacher, I could have 5 year 7 classes. That's a lot of children to get to know. So how is it that senior leaders are really prioritizing adaptive teaching by not only providing the professional learning, but the time within which to reflect and digest and look at the information that is either on our pupil passports or the signals that the children are beaming back to us through their books, through formative assessment? I think that's got to be a major priority. And I think what you said there about, you betray your priorities by the actions that you take. And are you creating the conditions within which that teachers have the right amount of time, an appropriate amount of time within which to really tackle adaptive teaching effectively? Because I think it's that thing, every
Well,
teacher wants to go into
we
the
all,
classroom. Yeah, every teacher wants to go into the classroom and do the best job that they can. And again, this comes back to David Didow's intelligent accountability. If adaptive teaching is not taking place in your context, the first thing that you've got to consider as a leader is, are you creating the conditions for it? Do staff have the training behind it? Have they had the coaching to support it? Have they got the time to do it? What things can you minimize that noise, that admin, all that sort of stuff. I think that's vitally important.
That's such a key message that kind of builds so nicely on everything that you've said so far as well, is that this isn't just about teachers. This isn't about teachers doing better. This is about leaders creating the conditions that enable teachers to devote the headspace to doing
Mhm.
better stuff in classrooms. And so much of what we've spoken about so far is about helping teachers to have the headspace to make better decisions in the
Mhm.
best interest of what they already know about the students. They know these students, but
Yeah,
it's just, can we now give them the headspace to think about what that means? And therefore, what we will get as a result is better decisions. But that is all
100%.
about the conditions that you create as a leader. And I think in the past, we've probably fallen victim, I think, as a system, to trying to sort of circumnavigate that. And perhaps that's where we ended up in the past, like really going down the differentiation route, like quite hard. Certainly when I started teaching, it was very much a case of, on the written lesson plans that I had to produce, there was 4 boxes for my 4 different groups, and then I had an extra one for SEND as well. So what for people listening who maybe didn't teach through that period, or people who maybe just haven't quite got what is the difference between differentiation and scaffolding? Because I think there's lots of us actually that couldn't confidently say, like, what is the difference? And so I'm going to extend that as well. What's the difference, and is differentiation always bad?
Interesting. So I feel like for those of us that lived during the era of the lethally mutated version of differentiation, I think we've got kind of like a bit of shared trauma that happens here, in varying degrees in terms of what was implemented. And some of the stories that I'm going to share with you, like, I know that the people introducing it were doing it with the best intent at the time, but please can we make sure that we don't return to this? So in the time that I trained, it was very much about differentiated learning. You used ability. So you would, in secondary, it would be key stage 2
Mhm.
data. So you'd probably use summative data. And what you would do is you kind of decide in advance of a lesson, this group of children are going to do this group of children are going to do this and do this. And it led to tiered learning objectives, sometimes based on things like Bloom's taxonomy. It led to things like multiple worksheets. And this is where Margaret Mulholland talks about that it resulted in micro lessons, juggling micro lessons, and endless photocopying, which contributed to a lot of staff workload. In one context that I was in, we were asked to split the children into 3 different groups. They were inflexible groups. So in history, we used blue, purple, and pink because we just thought, why not? Because in history, you don't want to pick characters because beware false idols. And then in English, they had Shelley, Orwell, and Byron. That kind of made sense. In science, they had Curie, Newton, and some other scientist, I can't remember. But when it came to RE, they decided to go for Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, which was interesting. Um, so each of those groups had their own learning objective, but then they also had their own stretch objective as well, because we wanted each of those children to be challenged. So by the time that you said the 6 different learning objectives at the start of the lesson, and then produce those 6 different worksheets, because it was just absolutely impossible to do. So I think if we think about what differentiation is, I know that there's a quote by David Dider which talks about the dark art of differentiation, but I think that that's meant within the lens of how it lethally mutated. Differentiation is basically where we
Yeah.
acknowledge that there are diverse learners, and that in order to meet the needs of the diverse learners, we might provide different resources, or we might kind of group children, things like that. You are predetermining in advance of a lesson what a child can and cannot do. And that's what you would kind of follow through. And that's where sometimes we see a bit of Velcro TA going on. Now, differentiation, when it comes to particularly primary, where you've got rural settings and you've got year 3 and 4 in one class together, sometimes year 1, 2, and 3 in one class together, differentiation is obviously going to be appropriate, because year 4 will be learning that higher level curriculum. That is appropriate for differentiation to be used then. And likewise, in specialist provision, it's going to be appropriate to use then. So Chris's context. But then also it can be that within, say, you might have a child in year 4 who's operating at EYFS level. You are going to need to therefore provide that differentiation for them. What we're talking about is the lethally mutated version of it. So how it became like this movement away from differentiation, tailoring instruction to meet individual needs, and where teachers would use so differentiation basically means where teachers they differentiate content, process, products, or the learning environment. This became a beast, an absolute kind of like monster of itself. And I think that wasn't helped by the evidence culture. And I think people perceiving that that's what Ofsted wanted, and Ofsted were saying that. And I think it just got really out of hand and led to these kind of tables for different abilities. Everyone knows the rhinoceroses aren't as good as the parakeets. And what that does is, and this is a really great quote from Mark Roberts, is by having tiered learning objectives, by having these different tables, what we are doing is we are effectively advertising our low expectations of students. And we're saying we expect less of some students than of others. And if we think about how that feeds into a student's self-efficacy, particularly if in secondary context they're going from bottom set to bottom set, and they come with a mentality of, well, I'm in the bottom set, so I'm thick. That is not an approach that is not a mindset that we want our children to have. What we want to do is we really want to consider about how we can teach the top, give them that success and motivation that we talked about earlier on, and model day in, day out that we believe that they can go on and achieve and be successful. And a really great way that Rachel puts it in the book is with scaffolding, it's about kind of teaching to the top and scaffolding to get there rather than dumbing down and kind of reducing things. So, for example, if you had a book, it wouldn't be that you give the high prioritainers the whole page of the book and the low prioritainers a paragraph. My belief with that, and Mary Meyer, who is the absolute goat, by the way, she talks about the fact that you are putting a glass ceiling on children, predetermining what they can and cannot do. And in the end, we are all entitled to do difficult things. Fantasy football is difficult, but I am entitled to give it a go. And it might take me longer to get good at it. It might require more models and more coaching, but I am entitled to do it. And it shouldn't be that we're creating a curriculum of the privilege where some get this access to this rich world that others only get to look on and admire from afar. That's not equity within education, and that won't lead to equality within education. So moving away from kind of, the predetermined aspect of it, what we've got with adaptive teaching and scaffolding is it's that teach the top and not predetermining in advance of a lesson what a child can and cannot do. It's about teaching the same rich curriculum, but acknowledging that some students will require different scaffolds and support to get to the top of that. And as Rachel said, it's about planning with higher prioritainers in mind and scaffolding down rather than low prioritainers in mind, and then adding on extra tasks and extra challenges, etc. And John Eaton's work, I think, is really brilliant for this. And we use this a lot in the book in our presentations, where he talks about the process for it is anticipating in advance the lesson, the different barriers that students may face. Those may be ones based on pupil information, such as attendance, reading age, low working memory, SEND. It's also your knowledge of the sticky points in the curriculum that quite often are tricky. For me, Weimar Constitution, they don't understand what a constitution is. So I know a lot of kids will struggle when we get to that. But then it's also about considering your formative assessment as well. So over the sequence of lessons, how has that information been processing? Is it landing as intended? And so when you've got those barriers, what you can do is plan in advance what those scaffolds may be for those students. And it could be whole group, it could be whole class, it could be individual groups, it can be individuals themselves. And it's about using really effective, inclusive checks for understanding. And it was interesting because I was listening to something that Adam Boxer said, or maybe he wrote about it, where he said, effectively, we should be doing checks for understanding every 3 to 5 minutes. And I think he's right, because even if you're doing a 10-minute piece of independent writing, how do you not know that after minute 2, out there and they just don't have a Scooby what's going on? So using really inclusive checks for understanding, using Lemob's idea of 100% participation, 100% hard thinking, that will then inform, actually, do I need to add a different scaffold? Do I need to tweak this one? Do I just actually need to reteach? Or actually, can I remove the scaffold because this child's absolutely flying? And remember, we want to get them to that independence and that autonomy. And so it's about how we are there therefore really responsive to adjusting what we've put into place within the lesson. I find this really, really important because I'm going to give you a bit of a personal story, which is when I was in year 12, I sat my AS levels in history. And across 3 papers, I got 396 out of 400. That's normally the point where you applaud, but thanks for that, lads.
Excellent.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, very
However,
good.
however, when I was in year 8, I was in the bottom set for history. I we had to set an end of year 7 assessment. I didn't know revision was a thing. I just thought that knowledge was there in your head and then you just used it. And
Well,
so I didn't score very well and I ended up in the bottom set. And that was really demotivating for me. Now, had it been that my teacher had accepted that score as a fait accompli, that actually this person is low ability and therefore I'm not going to challenge them as much, then arguably I wouldn't have gone on to have done a history degree, become a history teacher, and whilst hundreds of children would be so overjoyed if that hadn't been the case, that I'd become a history teacher, I am who I am today because my teachers raised their expectations and thought, actually, this is attainment, and attainment is not fixed. This is about actually, this is her starting point at this point. What do I know of this child? How can I scaffold to get them to the top where the top set is headed for as well?
You know, there is so much that we could unpick there in what you were saying. And as you were talking, I was kind of thinking, oh, I'm going to try and zoom in on that next. And then I was like, oh no, I'll leave that. I'll zoom in on this. And then I probably changed like 3 or 4 different times as you were talking, which is credit to you because I mean that there's just so much fantastic insight in what you said. I guess the point that I'd really like to pick up on with it is that sometimes I think it's tempting to think about, particularly from a primary perspective, actually, if you are thinking about a particular student and you're going, okay, well, actually, differentiation is appropriate for them.
Mhm,
Sometimes the grain size that we consider differentiation in is, I think, is too big. So
mhm,
a typical one is, okay, so this child has, um, this child hasn't mastered enough of the phonic code yet to actually access independent reading at the same level as the rest of the class. Perhaps they're still on the equivalent of like a mid to end of year 1 phonics level, and they're in year 6. So
mhm,
the theory there, and often I think the assumption people make is so that child needs differentiation in reading
mhm,
as a subject, right? I think that's probably too big a grain size to think about. And I think
mhm,
back to a child who we had in my last school last year, 2 years ago actually, sorry, who was in that exact situation.
mhm,
Now, when we did paired reading in class, which we do every lesson for vast majority of the time, rather than his partner reading the text and then him reading the text, his partner read the text all the way through in full. Then his partner read a sentence and he echoed the sentence back. Then his partner
mhm,
read the next sentence, then he echoed that sentence back. And then they did that twice, and then his partner read it through again. So what that did was it enabled him to be part of socially, from a social point of view, it enabled him to be part of the lesson. It also enabled him to practice things like tone and intonation and
mhm,
prosody, which at one point in this kid's life, he's going to be able to master enough of the phonic code to be able to read. And when he does,
mhm,
all of this other stuff's going to be there waiting for him. It's all going to click into place. So he didn't
100%.
need differentiation in that part of it. Where he needs the
Mhm,
differentiation is in the teaching of reading.
mhm,
So aside from that, yeah, as well as being a part of that lesson, he also had a 15-minute session once a day where he had reading instruction at the level that he actually needed it at. But often I think kids like that, they're looked at and people go, okay, well, we need differentiation in the subject of reading. Let's take that child out of the reading lesson and they can do one-to-one reading with the teacher.
mhm,
But we are in what you were saying earlier, we're just denying them a
mhm,
really fundamentally important experience. Because when we then had whole class discussion and paired discussion, and I would go over and listen to that child's responses and take ideas from that child, he was absolutely on a par with everybody. So
mhm,
his thinking about text and understanding of the situation and how he would interpret it was on a par. It was just the ability to decode the words that was missing. So yeah, I wanted to pick up on that just because I think it's a
yeah,
real subtle thing where if we are using differentiation, differentiation of what, and is that
mhm.
grain size too big?
Yeah, 100%. There's an example in the
Go on,
book in
Alex.
the
Go, go, go.
there's an example in the reading chapter of exactly what you're talking about in the secondary lens, where we've got the same challenging text. And what we're doing is we're using teacher-led modeled reading because, in a history curriculum where you've got finite time, we would love to have the time to do more echo reading, choral reading, that sort of thing. But teacher-led modeled reading is a really
Mhm.
efficient way in those subjects. And you can see that using reciprocal reading, that teacher modeling of how to strategically unpick explicit vocabulary, how to summarize, how to clarify, there are two very different student profiles who are completing exactly the same task and they are both successful. And one of those student profiles is engaging in an Alexonics program to support their phonetical understanding because their phonics is not where it needs to be. So it would be very easy for me
Mhm.
to be like, actually, I'm either going to remove that child or I'm going to give them a gobbatized kind of like version of it because, their barrier is this. Actually teach the top. And by doing that, some people might say, well, if you're spending all that time modeling how to do the reading, what about the stretch and challenge and old inverted commas? And well, actually, how many students read an exam question and they read it wrong? Or when it comes to GCSE in history, you will have interpretations that you've never come across before in sources. In English, you've got unseen texts. So actually, how are we ensuring that we're developing the metacognitive skills which support all students to be strategic readers? Because they might be able to read fluently and they may be able to understand things, but in high pressure situations, are we equipping them with the skills to be strategic?
I love that. I think as well, one of the really big things to try and draw this together in terms of a call to arms is that EHCPs, and I know we're in a world where we don't know what they're going to look like, but we have very well-meaning educational psychologists providing schools with things in Section F that legally have to be done that promote the idea of differentiation in this lethally mutated way. So, people are heading towards various internet sites that many people use where they have a star rating. And then you can do the first page has got 1 star, and then you can build it to 3 stars. And it's the same question, just done in 3 different ways. And we've been guilty of going along with that because you kind of have to. And, these children are statemented. They've got to be treated differently, right? And to try and crack that nut and break that cycle and go, yes, but to use Adam's, the grain size is too big here. Like we need to be focusing on more minute steps that we can work with inclusion in the classroom. Otherwise, we having a conversation with an officer inspector where they come in and say, tell me who your SEN pupils are. Tell me who your pupil premiums are. Sorry, do you want them to wear a different coloured hat? So I'll tell you what, I'll put sparklers in the SEN kids and the other ones that can have a little sticker. None of this makes any sense if we're all being told to think about inclusion and making sure everyone's in the room and feeling that, going back to that success before motivation. If we aren't thinking like you're thinking, Alex, and if we aren't talking about the things you're talking about, we risk kind of going back to that world, particularly as we're about to enter a world where we don't know what inclusion is going to look like from a SEND point of view. Because that is really where this is all heading. The conversations about inclusion and scaffolding is some of our most vulnerable children. The scaffolds that we're being told we have to do, literally place them in another room. They become the other. Oh, and bring them in for the plenary at the end, and we can all clap together. It's
Yeah.
condescending
Sounds
of
good.
me, but like it's kind of that it happens, and those are the children that need us the most, and those are the children that you were back in year 7.
Yeah.
The kind of, well, I'm just crap then, aren't I? So I'm not going to bother then. If this is me, it's been set for me. My path is done. Like you say, fait accompli. I ain't going anywhere else. So why should I bother? It then
Yeah.
becomes our job to solely stand in front of them and go, you can do this, and we're going to do everything we can together to kind of get you there. I'm very mindful of time because our listeners have commutes, and we've had some good feedback. So some of our episodes that have been like an hour and a half long, people have gone, no, it's too much. So I just wondered, Alex, is there anything that you kind of want to end with or summarize on, or even if you've got a bit of a call to arms with something you're feeling particularly passionate about right now that we can let everybody know about, see if we can't join the fight with you?
I think it comes back to everything that I focused my thesis on in terms of equity and equality within education. And I truly believe that inclusive teaching and learning strategies are massively important for how it is that we create an environment of belonging and a true environment of inclusion. So, as you said, it's not about othering students and placing, yes, obviously provide the appropriate interventions and person specific adjustments which are required. But actually, it's about how can we really make sure that we are fostering that sense of self-efficacy, that belief, that sense of belongingness, and how can we support teachers to break down those misconceptions and those unconscious bias about what students can and can't do in secondary. So often we see the trickle down effect of sets where they start off in set 2 and then they're in set 3 and they're in set 4, and that's them then bottomed out for the rest of it. For me, I think there's so much that we've talked about here, and it comes back to that, but at the heart of it, there has got to be really effective leadership. That leadership has got to be committed to ensuring that
Oh,
there is equity and equality within the classroom and within the school and within the community. And are they creating the conditions within which these multiple pillars that I talk about in my thesis, so things like a diverse curriculum that's underpinned by rich texts, as Mary Meyer advocates, inclusive teaching and learning strategies, literacy and oracy is the bedrock of the curriculum, pastoral initiatives which foster belongingness, such as hygiene banks. If we don't have that really effective, decisive leadership that really buys into it, then we can say all we want to about adaptive teaching and scaffolding. We can hire in as many consultants to do one off CPD sessions as we like. If we are not creating the conditions and the environment by which our teachers can really develop their expertise and have that breathing space that we've talked about, then we aren't going to be able to achieve that goal that we want to.
I think
Brilliant.
that's absolutely, yeah, that's stunning and perfect. And listen, by the time this episode goes out, fingers crossed for your Viva, I'll change all of the graphics, and we'll whack on a couple of letters at the front of your name if needs be. So do let us know. Uh, Alex, thank you so much for coming on the Edge Pulse podcast and our series from the
Can we just do one
Thoughts
quick plug before we
Space.
finish, Chris?
Yeah, go on then. Why not?
But only because, Alex, where can people get in touch with you if they're thinking, actually, we really want to work on scaffolding, or we want to work on coaching, or we want to work on sequencing of our curriculum, reading, these areas that you've got this substantive expertise in. If people want to get in touch with you and want to work with you, how do they do it?
So you can find me on my website at alexfairlamb.com, and that kind of lists my areas of expertise that might be of interest to you. You can also find me on LinkedIn as well. And as I mentioned during the podcast very kindly, we do have a number of books where it is that, if you want to try before you buy and kind of read what I've written about before you commit to perhaps contacting me, those books are available along with other publications as well.
Fantastic. Brilliant.
Amazing. Alex, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for contributing to From the Thought Space. And I'll make sure everybody's got your details underneath. So, everyone, please go and check out Alex and the work that she's doing. Support our independent consultants, do some great work. Adam, it's been lovely to see you. Um,
Thanks.
it's been a while because of fatherhood, but lots of things are happening. And our book, because this is going to come out before then, so our book is either out right now or just about to come out. So, Succeeding as a Deputy Head, very exciting. I can't wait to be an actual co-author with you. It's going to be very cool.
It's going to be good. It's going to be good. Out into the world for real, joining Alex's club.
Absolutely. It's the best club. Okay, thank you everybody for listening, wherever you are, in a car, in a bus, on a train, or on a plane. And we'll catch you next time on the Edge Pulse podcast.